Right Away with Craig Murray. For more information, visit cmurray.com. The importance of realism. Your story has to be 100% realistic, logical, believable, especially if it's not. What do I mean by that? You have to define the logic and the rules of the universe your story exists in. Even in stories which are complete fantasy, science fiction, it doesn't matter. You have to decide on the rules of your universe and stick to them. You have to remember that if you were writing fiction that takes place in a particular period, what actually existed in that period? Let's segue just for a moment. There's a great story about how samurai, Abraham Lincoln, and fax machines all existed at the same time. Maybe 100% accurate. However, for a reader, it's going to be very confusing if Abraham Lincoln gets a fax from a samurai. Unless absolutely necessary, try to stick to what's generally understood history. If not, at the very least, explain why this historical issue actually existed at the time. Mr. President, would you look at this, sir? What is it? It's a special message made by the teletype. Some smart man's figured out that by transmitting dots and spaces, you can send more than just letters, but actual pictures. Well, that's astonishing. What a time to be alive, said Abraham Lincoln. Now, getting back to the other 99.9% of fiction writing. I read a story not too long ago that was basically modern fiction, taking place right now. There were a couple of problems with it. For starters, the people behaved in ways that no normal person would behave. It opens with a car racing down a winding country road at breakneck speed during an almost whiteout blizzard. It described how they could barely see beyond the end of the front of the car, and the headlights illuminated the densest snowflakes as they whipped past. So right off the bat, no sane person's going to be driving at breakneck speed in a blizzard. You'll die. Can't be a surprise, can't be an unexpected outcome. Now, of course, the car spins off the road and ends up in a ditch. No one's hurt, the car doesn't roll 15 times before bursting into flames, so that's good, but they're definitely stuck. Now, like I said, this takes place in modern times. No one has a cell phone. No one calls for roadside assistance. No one does anything other than the incredibly illogical thing to do, which is to get out of the car in a blizzard, which is described as blinding. But fret not, dear reader. The moment they get out of the car, they spot a house in the distance. The blizzard's magically stopped, and the darkness, which was impenetrable, now seems to be barely dusk. So they trek through knee-deep snow to this remote house, arrive at the door, and one of them promptly kicks it in. You see where I'm going with this? We're not even through the first half of the first page, and already we have multiple unrealistic events. None of the guys are described as firemen or members of the SWAT team. They're 3 college-age students. Have you ever tried to kick in a door? You're not kicking in the door unless the hinges are crap or the lock is crap. The only thing you're going to do is hurt your leg. Bizarrely, they don't bother knocking first. They don't bang in the door in desperation, hoping whoever lives there will help them. Nope, arrive in the middle of what was a pitch-black night and kick in someone's door. Now, as an intelligent reader, you're going to find problems with this absolute lack of reality. It doesn't bode well for the rest of the story. If it starts ludicrous, it's probably not getting any better. This need for reality and rules is just as important, even more so in fantasy or science fiction. If your longboat can travel 100 miles a day, it probably shouldn't cross a 1,000-mile ocean in a couple of days. If your people are walking across country, they're probably not going to do much better than 5 miles an hour. So having them travel 500 miles across hill and dale, up and down mountains, across rivers, through forests that no man has ever trod in, and doing it in a couple of days, not very realistic. It ruins the reality for your reader. It ruins the fantasy. Your world no longer makes sense. It's not following any rules. You as the author have to define the rules of your world, the rules of your characters, and you have to make them solid. This maintains the reader's immersion and fantasy. We see this shortcoming in modern huge films with huge budgets and the ability to hire writers who haven't suffered some sort of catastrophic brain injury. They should be able to, they just don't seem to. Now, I'm not saying this is the exact same thing, but let's look at something from our modern media. In the original Star Wars, Luke Skywalker knows nothing about being a Jedi. He knows nothing about the Force or lightsabers or anything else. Luckily, he becomes part of a plucky band. And another quick segue. The plucky band of tossed-together adventurers is very popular. It's very old. and it still works. You have the rogue, the old man, the young hero, the brave princess to be rescued, the comedic duo, a dog, yeah, okay, that's Chewbacca, fantastic worlds, and a glorious fight against an all-powerful evil. It worked in Lord of the Rings, it worked in Star Wars. But let's get back to Star Wars. Luke gets some initial training from Obi-Wan. He gets a brief introduction before Obi-Wan's killed by Vader. Poor Luke. Not to fear, though. He goes off to Dagobah, is trained extensively by everyone's favorite Yoda. Here he gets a chance to really master everything. We see his growth, his gaining of skills, his abilities, and everything else that turns him into a real Jedi. He suffers and struggles and fails and finally learns. Now let's jump ahead 30 years. We have a young girl also living on a crappy desert planet. Yeah, great originality, guys. The girl gets a lightsaber and suddenly she's as good, if not better, than anyone else. No training, no practice, no need for growth. Not very realistic. It ruins the whole need for growth that every hero must go through. It would be like you hefting a sword and suddenly being able to beat up Conan the Barbarian. Even in the original Conan movie with Schwarzenegger, you see him go from completely untrained and getting beaten up in his first fight to becoming more and more skilled until finally he's unbeatable. It's the progression of the hero. It follows rules and reality we can all understand. This is very much in keeping with another talk I have about atomic bombs. Not the nuclear things that go boom, but the characters that are supernaturally powerful and able to beat anyone. It's not good writing. We're here to do good writing. You'll find that a lot of authors in crafting the world will make maps and charts, most with a scale, to show the hero's journey, to keep track of how long and how far apart things are. It can be a lot of fun. Let's just say, for talking's sake, we're writing a fantasy story. If our characters are going to be traveling, and pretty much every good story has a characters going on a journey, we need to really create our world. Here's what I suggest you do. You start with a piece of paper and a sort of sketch out bubbles that'll control the size and location of each place. Don't worry about getting too detailed or too technical just now, just stage one. So we have our big central bubble of where our characters live. Inside that bubble, we're going to make different size circles or dots for important places. This is the capital. This is the harbor. Over here are the mountain ranges. Over here are the forests. This bubble over here at the top, these are the Northlands. We know they're there, but they don't really do anything in our story. Over here are the magical islands. Over here is the whatever. Now that you have a rough idea, time to get out the graph paper. Before you do anything, get a map of where you live. Start with a map of your regional area, state, province, whatever. Get an idea of how big things are and how far apart they are. For the time being, let's look at just straight line distances. So figure out the scale and measure between your house and that major city. How far away is it? Is it as far as your heroes would want to go? Now time for the dreaded math. If they're doing 5 miles an hour walking, how many hours will it take for them to get there? Keep in mind people need to eat and sleep and go to the bathroom. Nobody is walking 40 hours nonstop. Let's say, for example, your heroes are going on a huge journey from where they live in the plains to the mountains far away. Same thing. Figure out how long the route is and how many days or weeks it would take them to get there. It's a lot easier now than it used to be. I remember unfolding maps and copying scales on the bottom and using that to measure the routes. As an example, if you walked from London, England to Glasgow, Scotland, that's 10 days. Keeping in mind you get to follow major roads along the way. They didn't exist the same way 1,000 years ago. You can go on what is pretty much everyone's favorite online map and measure from point to point. This allows you to get a good idea of how far away things are and how long it'll take your characters. Of course, keep in mind nobody is maintaining top speed going up the side of the Matterhorn or through unexplored Amazonian jungle. You're going a lot slower. What are they doing for food and drink? If they're about to spend 2 weeks crossing a desert, did they have 2 weeks worth of food and water, or did they just plan to die? You don't need to get into the minutiae. You don't need to drag the story down to a crawl with logistical details. If you're not interested, your reader probably won't be interested. That said, though, you have to know. You have to have a grasp on your own realism, your own reality. There's a ton of stuff the reader doesn't need to know, but you, the author, absolutely have to know to keep your details real and consistent. This is just as true in science fiction stories with spaceships going between planets. You can go online and find all sorts of star maps that'll tell you how far different stars are away from each other. It'll give you a pretty good idea of the sort of distances you're dealing with. Again, keep in mind you're not writing a factual scientific book. Not everything needs to be exact, but you have to identify your reality, your rules, and stick with them. Imagine your ship can travel 10 times the speed of light. So how long will it take for them to go from this one to this one? One of the things you find in some really bad writing is it takes 4 days for them to fly to this place and 1 day to fly back. I guess they had a good tailwind. There is a huge amount of detail the reader will never know about. The writer, of course, has to know those details. You may know that the cost of a fresh horse is 1 gold sovereign and your hero has 3 gold sovereigns. The reader may not have to know that, but you can keep track in your head so the money he has or doesn't have isn't a magical amount. And you do see that. The hero who is penniless still manages to pay for a hotel, a wayside inn, his meals, get a horse, some new armor, and pay for it all with his dashing good looks. I read a story a long time ago of a guy who was seemingly homeless and destitute, except he walked into a Las Vegas used car lot and bought a car for $5,000. The whole of that is basically him walking up to the salesman saying, "I'll take this one," and handing him $5,000. Not a check. He didn't have to go to the bank and withdraw it. He wasn't using it for a bar of soap, a wash, and a shave. Nope. He just magically had the exact amount of money that he needed to buy the car, get it licensed and registered and insured and drive off the lot. Yeah, okay. Define your rules, normal or fantastic, and stick to them. It can be little things. The city bus rarely goes door to door. Do you have a transfer? Do you have a long walk? But still, you read it in stories. Becky steps out of her office onto the bus, gets back off the bus, and walks straight into her house. Does this ever happen? The heroes managed to cover 1,000 miles in 2 days. Magic shoes, I guess. These little slip-ups can completely ruin what could be a really great story. Don't do that. Now getting back to the dreaded map making and distances. Just for the sake of ease, we're going to let our fit and healthy walkers cover 20 miles a day. If they aren't fit and healthy, half that distance, but for now, let's keep it. Each square in your graph paper is going to be 20 miles for a large map. Now you can start filling in those distances you figured out from the online maps. They need to walk to the ocean from their village, it's 100 miles. Okay, that's 5-day walk, that's 5 squares. They need to go to the mountains, they're 300 miles away. Well, 300 is 15 squares, 15 days. You get where I'm going with this. Crossing a river might take a day or two to build a raft. Climbing a mountain or going through forest or jungle, that's going to take a lot longer. You can change the scale of your map to suit. A national map might have 1 square being 100 miles or more. Detailed maps might drop that right down to a mile or less. If your story takes place in a city and details are important, then you might be doing a block-by-block layout where each square is 1/10 of a mile. If you're making a planet, start with a map of the Earth. Figure out sizes and distances of land masses and oceans, and while not copying the Earth, you can lay out your own continents and oceans to suit. There's a ton of printable Earth maps online, and you can just draw over top of them. I don't want to focus too much on map making, that's not really the point here. It does hopefully show you how detailed you might need to get to keep your reality real. And of course, last but not least, the incredible importance of never specifying anything. This is a curious but not avoided trick for saving you time, frustration, and effort if it's not required. And that's never doing any of this if it's not really important. Instead of saying, Gefralt the Mighty walked into the wayside inn, paid 3 coppers for a tankard of ale, a silver piece for some chicken, 2 sovereigns for the luxury suite, and 40 pennies for his horse to be fed. You just say, he walked in, paid for his meal and stabling, and looked about the place. Instead of saying he took 3 days by road, 2 days by barge, 25 minutes for a pee break and a snack, you just say, the days slipped past as he made his way to Castle Perilous. If the time or amounts don't mean anything, if they don't impact your storyline, avoid using them. Something can be expensive or cheap if you need to describe it. It can be near or far. You don't always have to detail it. Detail where detail is needed. A number of years back, I read a short story where the hero had to drive from LA to New York to rescue someone. Okay, it's a 40-hour drive at best. That's nonstop. You can't drive 40 hours nonstop. You need gas and food and sleep and the bathroom. In this story, however, the bad guys had kidnapped a person, and I guess they're just sitting around playing cards for the days it took, somewhere between 3 and 4, so the hero could suddenly appear. Yeah, okay. I'm lucky enough I live near a major international airport. If I suddenly need to fly to Paris to rescue the Pope from alien invaders, checking right now, there's an economy flight leaving in 8 hours. It's almost 10 hours to get there and about $1,000. There's a first-class flight leaving later tonight. It's $4,000, 12 hours, and it's got a stopover and transfer in Newark, New Jersey. These times might become important in your story. Keep track of them. No one hops on a plane in New York and arrives in Marrakesh the same day. You need a travel visa. In movies and books, your hero runs into an airport and minutes later is sipping champagne at 40,000 feet in first class before smiling seductively at the stewardess and stepping out of the foreign airport right into a cab. So balancing act number 4,732 for writers. Detail if needed, accuracy if accuracy is needed, realism whenever realism is needed.